Shana Tova. There is probably no more recognizable part of the Rosh Hashanah liturgy than the Unetaneh Tokef, which we'll be reciting in just a few minutes. And this particular prayer has a particularly fascinating origin story. According to legend, Unetaneh Tokef was written in the 11th century by a sage named Rabbi Amnon of Mayence, who is totally unknown to history, except for this one story. And so Rabbi Amnon was a friend of the archbishop, and as such, he was pressured to convert to Catholicism. As a delaying tactic, he requested 3 days to consider the offer. He immediately regretted intensely giving even the pretense that he could possibly accept a foreign religion. After spending the 3 days in prayer, he refused to come to the archbishop as promised. And then he was forcibly brought to the archbishop's palace. At that moment, he begged that his tongue be cut out to atone for his sin. Instead, the archbishop ordered his hands and legs amputated, limb by limb, as punishment for not obeying his word to return after 3 days and for refusing to convert. At each amputation, Rabbi Amnon was again given the opportunity to convert or die, which Rabbi Amnon refused. He was sent home with his severed extremities on a knight's shield. This event occurred shortly before Rosh Hashanah. On that holiday, as he lay dying, Rabbi Amnon asked to be carried into the synagogue, where he recited the original composition of Unetaneh Tokef with his very last breath. 3 days later, he appeared in a dream to Rabbi Kalanimus ben Meshulam, one of the great scholars and liturgists of Mayence, and begged him to transcribe the prayer and to see that it was included in the text of the High Holiday service. Thus, the legend continues that Unetaneh Tokef became part of the standard liturgy. Yet even for those of us unfamiliar with this likely apocryphal origin story, the power of this prayer is clear from simply reading its text in English, which includes, "A great shofar is sounded and a still small voice is heard. As a shepherd herds his flock, causing his sheep to pass beneath his staff, so do you cause to pass, count, and record, visiting the souls of all living, decreeing the length of their days, inscribing their judgment. On Rosh Hashanah it is inscribed, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed. How many shall pass away, and how many shall be born? Who shall live, and who shall die? Who shall reach the end of his days, and who shall not? Who shall perish by fire, and who by water? Who by famine, and who by thirst? Who by earthquake, and who by plague? Who shall be at rest, and who shall be tormented? Who shall be exalted, and who shall be brought low? But repentance, power, prayer, and acts of righteousness have the power to avert the severity of the decree." It is not a surprise that to many this liturgical poem, this piyut, is considered the pinnacle of the Rosh Hashanah service. Its haunting and powerful language make it abundantly clear: change or die. Not only does this prayer literally say that our fates will be sealed based upon our actions, with some of us written into the book of death, we also wear the kittel, this white garment that is reminiscent of the white shrouds in which we'll someday be buried. Who shall live and who shall die? The stakes literally could not be any higher. But for all this prayer's pomp and power, there's one essential problem with it. It simply doesn't work. In our story, Rabbi Amnon is told, convert or die. And he still refuses to convert. In our own lives, we return year after year, essentially the exact same people with the same faults and flaws, having not heeded the teaching of this prayer. Change or die is perhaps the highest of stakes, but for most of us, it is insufficient to inspire substantive change. Studies have shown that whether it is the success of overcoming addiction, changing one's ways in business, or personally changing one's lifestyle, only approximately 10% of people will ever change their ways. Even if not changing puts their very lives in jeopardy. The threat of death, therefore, cannot be the correct tool to bring about a new and better life. So if fear of death is not sufficient to bring about substantive change, what does work? What tools do we need in order to be better people, better Jews, and better loved ones this coming year? How can we work together to return next year this time and say to our God, I have changed, I am better, and I can still continue to grow? According to Alan Deutschman in his book, Change or Die, the keys to change are to relate, to repeat, and to reframe. In other words, gaining new hope, new skills, and new thinking. The first objective in actualizing change comes through relationships. How often have we come to view an issue differently because someone we cared about brought it to our attention? Our relationship to LGBTQ plus concerns changed when we discovered that we had a gay friend, or our relationship to a disease changed when a loved one was diagnosed. It all begins by forming a new emotional relationship with a person or community that inspires us to see our world in a new way. While those relationships may inspire us to see the world in a different way, the need for relationships are even more critical when trying to bring about changes in behavior within ourselves. Well, we often think of groups like Alcoholics Anonymous and Weight Watchers to be about supporting each other, which they certainly do. Perhaps even more important than the support is actually the accountability. Going to a weigh-in or having someone to announce how long that person has been sober makes one accountable to the group and further encourages progress. One example of this is when Mimi Silbert founded the Delancey Street program, a program designed to reintegrate criminals into society. She placed them into groups of 10. She even called that group a minion. And that group would meet weekly. Those meetings were not designed for support. They were designed to call out inappropriate behaviors and to hold every one of them accountable for their choices. While obviously working to curtail inappropriate activities, it also demonstrated that the group believed that each individual was capable of better. The only reason they are being confronted with their poor choices is because they know that that person can and must do better. But not every problem has a support group. While it would likely be well attended, I'm not familiar with the I need help with my mother-in-law support group, or the Will you be my friend program for people feeling isolated and alone. Sometimes just the support of one person is enough to give oneself the belief that one requires. A personal trainer or nutritionist who connects with you in just the right way. A yoga or meditation instructor who finds a way to make those practices more personally meaningful. Or a loved one who believes in you. And they know that you are capable of more. It is nearly impossible to change alone. That is why even in the Unetaneh Tokef we read that while the great shofar is blasted, it's only in the still small voice that is actually heard. We need the voices of those we trust to guide and support us. From their belief in us, we end up believing in ourselves. Therefore, the first step in finding new hope in oneself is to find a person or people who will both support you and hold you accountable in your journey towards self-improvement. Now, once one has found new hope through these right relationships, the next task is actualizing the change through repetition. Take, for example, a family that decided to get a pet. They brought this animal home because they were told that the dog's presence in the family would be of support for the children, in particular with their struggle with anxiety. The problem was that one of the parents really did not like dogs. They didn't like pets. They never had. And yet, to support their loved one, they now have this animal in their home. The pet comes home, and they are totally indifferent at best to this animal. But they care for it because they love their children. But then, who knows? The parent starts caring about this pet and loving it in ways that they never thought were possible. Now, this should not be a surprise because studies show that even if a person doesn't like a dog, after a few months of caring for a pet, they will probably develop affection for it. The act of caring ultimately instills the emotion of care. In other words, you have to do things a certain way before you can think things in a new way. Or in other words, fake it till you make it. Jessica Goldberg, name has been changed to protect the innocent, never really liked attending services. They were boring, and in a language that she could barely read, let alone understand. But when Jessica's mother passed away, she decided that it would be important to her mother that she attend the evening service as often as she could. She started attending 4 to 5 times a week, saying Kaddish for her mother, and being the 10th person with reasonable regularity. She met some new people that she had seen around the shul before, but had never really spoken to in the past. The words and tunes started becoming more familiar, and before she knew it, her 11 months were up. And yet, having developed these relationships, having developed over time a deeper appreciation for minyan attendance, Jessica couldn't imagine not going to minyan anymore. After all, what if they didn't have a minyan because she wasn't there? She would miss her new minyan friends and found it meaningful to end her day with self-reflection and prayer. This change in her life, which began from a place of total disinterest, changed because she incorporated into her life for a sustained period of time. No matter whether we fully believe that we will actualize this change in our lives, we need to commit to incorporating it regularly into our lives. Make it what Maimonides called hergel, or habit. I shared before I came for the high holidays when I was here for Shabbat a couple weeks ago, a story about the high holidays that was taught to me by one of my teachers, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who talks about the idea of the person who shows up for the high holidays, hoping, dreaming, aspiring to be inspired, maybe by a sermon of possible. And yet, more often than not, this person would show up and leave with the same disinterest. And they went up to Rabbi Dorff and said, "What's the secret? What's the tool?" And he shared with you a metaphor from baseball. He shared the metaphor that the best baseball players in the entire world only get a hit maybe 1 out of 3 times. They practice their entire lives. They spend every day learning how to hit a baseball. And they aspire to get a hit 1 out of every maybe 3 times. And when they get a hit, it's usually not a home run. It's a single. Maybe it's a walk. And yet they continue to practice, they continue to engage, to have those experiences. No change happens without repetition. No change happens without a commitment to repeat performance. By forming sustaining relationships and by committing to regularly engaging in the changes that we want to see in our lives, even before we fully embrace them, we will have completed 2 out of the 3 steps necessary to actualize meaningful change. The final leg of the journey is to reframe our relationship with this change and to begin thinking about ourselves and our choices differently. Once we have the relationships required to support us in our change, and we have actualized the change over the course of a period of time, seeing initial results, we're able to view not only the change, but more importantly, ourselves differently. For example, with those navigating health challenges, the first steps to a healthier lifestyle was finding people to support them in changing their lifestyle, whether it was a spiritual leader, a nutritionist, a personal trainer, or a loved one. Then with their support, they began eating better and working out more, incorporating healthier behaviors into their lives, making better living routine, and seeing tangible results. And these actions will get the individual most of the way there, but how do we make sure that those results continue for the duration? That they don't end up reverting to old behaviors, like so many Biggest Loser contestants did to their previous lifestyle. This is why reframing comes in. What if rather than changing their behavior because of fear of dying, they're doing it because of a joy for living? Seeing how much better they're feeling, seeing that they're able to do things that they couldn't have even imagined doing before, reframes the reason for taking on this new way of being. It is no longer change or die. It is instead change and thrive. The actualization of a better, more fulfilled life will assure that the change is long-lasting. We cannot change out of fear of what might happen. We change out of love for what will happen. Now, this process of relate, repeat, reframe is the right process. But what good is it if we don't do the hard work of figuring out what we want to change and how we're going to do it? In Change or Die, Deutschman addresses this reality when he writes, "Leaders persuade us not just by the stories that they tell, but also by the lives they lead, by personifying the beliefs and ideals they're advocating." I don't think a leader can accomplish major change without being willing to slice yourself open and become part of the change. In fact, that is my least favorite part of delivering sermons. The ideas are expressed, but then float out in the world without anywhere in particular to go. I hope that we'll take the opportunity in the silent Amidah in just a matter of moments to reflect on our own changes that we wish to make in the coming year. It could be living healthier or spending more time with family. It could be coming to weekday services with regularity, or it could be becoming a more attentive listener. The possibilities are endless. We must begin by deciding on the change. As we gather for Rosh Hashanah, take a minute to think about what you'd like to change. What relationships will you need to find success in your goal? Where can you find support, and where can you find people to hold you accountable? How can the synagogue help in this regard? Who will you be asking to assist you in this change journey? And finally, reframe. How will you reframe your life to make space for the change you wish to make? What contextualization do you need not only to make the change, but allow it to take hold? Take a moment and reflect on this past year or years. Is there a relationship in need of repair? A lifestyle change that you know you need to make? Or a practice that you'd like to take on? By relating, repeating, and reframing, we'll be able to return next year, having changed and thrived, an even better version of ourselves than we are today. Shana Tova.